everyone, and welcome again to Diane and the Written Words, where I post videos about books and about language. And today this is a video about books because I am going to do my August wrap up. It is the last day of the month. It is a bank holiday, and that is why I didn't post a video yesterday, which was my usually scheduled Sunday, and instead I'm posting it today, Monday. And let's get to it. So for August, I had a really ambitious TBR that I knew I wasn't gonna follow through, but there is still a value, or there was a value for me to make a list and see what my priorities were, what things I wanted to get into, and kind of organize my head around it as well. So I still feel like there was a reason why I did that TBR, and to be fair, I haven't done too badly. I have done better than I expected. So out of the 9 books that I had in my TBR, which, I'm not counting Animals in Translation by Temple Grandin and Kathleen Johnson, and I'm not counting Thing Explainer by Randall Munro, because those I had almost finished, and I actually finished Thing Explainer by the end of July. So I'm counting the other 9 books in my TBR for August, and out of those 9, I actually read 6. So that's pretty good. And then I have one of those books that is in progress and that I will finish in a couple of weeks. And that was also scheduled, even though I didn't explain it in the TBR, but it was expected. I read one extra book that was not part of my TBR, which was a graphic novel. So, it didn't take me very long. And it was also because I found it at my parents' place. I didn't know that they had that. So it was kind of a surprise. I started an extra book, and that's because of a friend of mine doing a book club, and I am taking 2 of those books in my original August TBR for my September TBR. So I'm not forgetting about them, I'm just transferring to the next month because I didn't have time. So out of the 6 books that I read, the first one I wanted to talk about is the only one that I have in physical form, and that is Dune by Frank Herbert. I read this book about 3 years ago and I really enjoyed it, but I found it very confusing. And so I wanted to read it again to get more out of it. And if you have read it only once, I think that I think it's confusing to everyone. So I would recommend you to read it again if you liked it, because upon reread, I enjoyed it a lot more. Not only that, but I was reading this as a read-along organized by Mikey Fernandez. The discussion was happening in Discord, and he posted a video saying that this was very stressful for him because it was almost too successful a read-along. So there were hundreds and hundreds of messages, and even I got a bit overwhelmed sometimes. But having said that, I absolutely loved it. I think some people were just coming up with these predictions that were so on point, and they were analyzing things like they were scholars in the matter. So I really, really, really liked it. Dune follows the Atreides family, who are given the rule of a new planet Arrakis, who's commonly known as Dune. And this is a desert planet where a very valuable spice is harvested and is also inhabited by giant worms. The world building is magnificent, and some of the political branches of power that this book develops are amazing. The main character is a bit flawed, like it's a bit bland, but I would highly, highly recommend it. If you like nowadays sci-fi, I think it's valuable as well, because this is the origin of sci-fi. This is one of the first books that became very popular in the genre. And so you will have probably seen a lot of the elements in this book in newer books, but this is where they might come from. And I find that as an investigative role of a reader, this is very interesting. So that's my first one. It was such a good read, honestly. I think I don't tend to give grades to books because I think they're very subjective, and it depends on my mood when I was reading something and on what I read before and after. So, I'm not one to give star ratings, but let's say if the first time I gave it X, the second time would have been like 5 times X. Okay, I'm not meaning 1 and 5 stars. I'm meaning like 5 times more than what I read, what I gave it on the first read. And I did buy the rest of the saga, and I do intend on reading it. On the first go, I read the first 3, but now I want to reread the first, second and third, and finish the saga. So you'll hear me talking about it, but not in September. I don't know if in October, maybe towards the end of the year. So first book, very successful, loved it. Read-alongs are for me, I think. Second book that I read is Matilda by Roald Dahl. This was also a reread. I actually did a lot of rereading this month, and I don't usually, but it's been so successful I might do more in the future. So Matilda is the tale of this genius girl that is abused by her parents and that finds solace in books and in learning. So I'm already sold on that. I really enjoyed it as a little girl, but now I saw the more adult side of it. So the abuse was a bit hard. It really broke my heart at times. How Matilda is just still joyful in the face of adversity, and how she meets Miss Honey, and also the little intrigues that she has at school are really funny. I posted a video about limericks and translation in Matilda. I had tons of fun with that, but I don't discard talking about Matilda a bit more in the future, because I have a few books by Roald Dahl and I want to do kind of an author analysis, let's say. I know Emily Kate is doing something like that and has done in the past, so if you are looking for that, have a look at Emily Kate's channel. I'll leave a card somewhere and below. Then I read Tales of the Unexpected, also by Roald Dahl, which is an adult book of short stories. And those are really, really dark. So like if you've read other Roald Dahls, you know that in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you have kids that keep disappearing. Do you have that kind of darkness into the prose? Tales of the Unexpected is like that, but it's meant for adults. So if anything, it's more of that. And in particular, the 2 that I remember that give me nightmares almost at night are one called Skin, where a famous artist paints a tattoo. I would say paints because that's the process that he follows, is more painting than tattooing, in the back of a friend of his. And then his friend years later doesn't have any money. So what will happen with that? Because he happens to have a very famous painter art in his skin. And then another one was Royal Jelly, where this couple are trying to conceive, but they're having a lot of problems, and he is a beekeeper, and his big passion. At some point, the woman starts thinking that her husband is looking a bit like a bee, like he's kind of stout and he has this stubble that looks brown, and then there's something that looks yellow as well in his skin, and it's just very gritty. It's fantastic. I highly recommend that. I want to watch the TV show. If you've watched it, let me know if you found that it was a truthful adaptation of the book, or if it's just based on the book. Either way, I think I'd like it, but I would like to know what I'm getting into. Going on to the 4th book, I actually read 2 thrillers/horror books this month. The first one was The Chalk Man by C.J. Tudor. I read her book, The Other People, a few months ago, and I really enjoyed it. I find that her style is a little bit like Stephen King. I think she has been compared to Stephen King. I suppose this is an author that we all have in mind, kind of, when we're reading. And he's sort of slow-paced, and she sets the scene really well. But unlike Stephen King, her books aren't 1,000 pages long, which I personally appreciate. So just to give you an example of The Chalk Man, we have here, this is non-spoilerish, it's just kind of the kind of style. So I have a quote in here for you. It says, "I sit outside one cafe, nursing a lukewarm cappuccino and smoking. Only one other table is occupied by a young couple, a woman with short, bleached blonde hair and a companion with dreadlocks and multiple piercings. I feel, and no doubt look, very old and very straight. So this little description is not crucial for the plot, but it's setting the scene and it's part of the characterization of our protagonist. And the chalk man follows a group of children and then the same group of people but years later. So he's got two timelines and he's very clever into moving from one to the other. It gives you just enough to get interested without too many cliffhangers in between. So I think the pace is really good. And he follows this group of friends who communicate through leaving chalk drawings in each other's homes, saying like, let's come to the park, find me in this place, something urgent, come over, things like that. And then there are a couple of murders, and that is when it gets a bit into horror in the description of those murders. There is an abusive priest and father. If you are religious and you might be offended by criticisms of religion, you might not like this book, by the way. Beautifully paced, beautifully written, highly recommend. And then the other thriller that I read was Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. And this one is snappy, is much faster paced. And I so enjoyed it. So full disclosure, I don't read thrillers that often, so I don't know how they compare to other thrillers. It might be that they are using lots of tropes and lots of commonplaces. I do not know. I know that I really like them. So in Lock Every Door, Jules is given an apartment sitting job, which comes at the best time for her because she recently lost her job. She ended a relationship. She doesn't have any money or any family or any support system, really. She has a best friend, but there's no one else there for her. So she gets this job sitting in an apartment in an iconic building in New York, just overlooking Central Park. And it sounds too good to be true. The only thing she has to do is to be there and maintain it, you know, in a good condition, make it clean. And she gets a ton of money and she doesn't have to do anything. So is it too good to be true? Probably. And that is where the plot starts. I was disappointed for like a second of the book when I thought something kind of obvious was going to happen, and then it didn't. And the way that the plot unraveled was masterfully done. I really liked this. I highly recommend it. And it's also a really quick read, and so you can just fly through it. So if you're thinking of readings for October, then you know that could be one for you. The sixth book that I read that was part of my TBR was A Conjuring of Light by V. Schwab. This is the third book in the Shades of Magic trilogy, and I think it went up for me from the second book. So I had a lot of questions, and some of them went answered, and some of them were resolved in a very different way from what I thought would happen, like the backstories of Lila and Kel were very different. So I don't know if you need me to tell you what this is about. I'll try and keep it short, but this is about parallel Londons and a few characters that can travel in between. One of the Londons is called Red London, and it's medieval times, and magic is a thing in this world, and different people can control different elements of magic. And in particular, we follow Kel, who's an Antari, which means that he can control all the elements, and not only that, but he can travel between worlds. And then we meet Lila, who is from Grey London, who's a world that doesn't have any magic, and she still gets to travel, and she's a thief, which makes things very interesting, and she ends up in Red London. And so there's various quests and various evil characters, and how the good characters kind of, you know, save the world over and over. And in a way it is tropey, but it kind of subverts some of those tropes as well. I particularly liked how things are described. So again, it's this kind of C.J. Tudor style as well. It is a bit slow paced at times. It's not super snappy. I mean, it's 3 big books, but it's poetic. The way that it describes magic, and it's like an energy that you channel through an element, and the way that magic is taught in certain parts of the book. The relationships between some of the characters are really nice, really good. And some of the characters were a little bit simple at first, but then they get more and more layers as you go along. So there's a lot more. And then some of the general messages of the book, such as who cares what your family is what you make of it, or you can always find home with the people you love. I have quite a lot to say about these books, but I'll put them in a review, in a dedicated video for them, because then I feel like I can give all the spoilers and we can have a conversation if you've read the books or if you don't mind spoilers. So these are the 6 books that I read that were part of my TBR for the month. The extra book that I read that wasn't part of my TBR is the graphic novel adaptation of George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia. And this adaptation was in Spanish, so Homenaje a Cataluña, and it was by Andrea, Lucio and Jordi de Miguel. As a graphic novel, it was interesting because it combined drawings with actual bits of an interview to a professor that specializes in George Orwell, and in particular talking about this book. And then it's got some pictures as well of the current places that the book describes about Barcelona, and current pictures of those places. I haven't read the original book. I am interested, although I think that I should do some other readings and probably ask my dad, because he knows a lot about history, because this is a very difficult time of Spanish history. So George Orwell was in Spain as a member of the POM, which is one of the political parties on the left during the Spanish Civil War. Now, the Spanish Civil War is basically the dictatorship, Franco, far right, and controlling the military against the liberal left forces. But these liberal forces, they were actually a myriad of different political parties, mainly communist, socialist and anarchist, and some of them were put against each other. And so it's often difficult to know who's even attacking whom, because there's so many interlinked wars within the Spanish Civil War. And this is why I don't know that I know enough to understand the book, unless the book gives me a lot of footnotes and endnotes and all sorts of context. But it is certainly important and relevant and valid to read about those things nowadays. And so the graphic novel is just the beginning of me learning about these things. What else? Okay, so that's one book that I didn't intend on reading that I completed. One book that is was part of the TBR that is still in progress is The Count of Monte-Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I'm reading the French version, the original, Le Comte de Monte-Cristo. And this is a read-along that I'm doing in Instagram. And because it's such a long book, we started at the beginning of August, but it's running on to September. So I think I'm now about halfway through the whole novel. It's more like a saga than a novel, really, like a series of books. I am really, really liking it. I do think that it's got a bit too much text, and sometimes it goes over my head because there's so many references to the historical, political context in the 19th century France. But despite that, it's super entertaining. I do feel bad for the protagonist. I feel really sad about the way that plotting a vengeance has affected his well-being. I don't know that he knows that himself. And so I feel like mental health is not treated very kindly in this book. But so far it's a feel-good book. It's packed with action. The action parts follow each other, and you are constantly gripping the book and wanting to know what happens next. So really good one. I started one book that I didn't intend on reading, but I'm actually very interested in the topic. And this is Are Presence Obsolete by Angela Davis. A friend of mine organized a book club, basically, or a discussion group, where we are going to read some articles and listen to podcasts and read some books, and this is one of them. And we read a book a month, so we haven't finished with this one. I think it's finishing in 2 weeks' time we are finishing this one. And this is so far a group that's only between friends. We are considering expanding this in the future, but in the meantime I'll just let you know what books we're reading for that. So Are Presence Obsolete by Angela Davis treats the theme of what interests are put in the current political policing prison system, and how we might move into a world that wouldn't have any prisons, and what the systems in place would look like. So do we need prisons? Do people feel safer? Are people actually safer with more and more prisons being built and more people being imprisoned? It's so far a very interesting topic that I know nothing about, so I am really looking forward to knowing more and to being an active part of society, you know, whether I decide that I'm with Angela Davis or not, or somewhere in between. I think everyone should at least know that this movement exists, that the abolition of prisons has been talked about for decades, and yeah, to know that it might be a possibility that prisons don't necessarily have to exist forever and ever. So this is one extra that I'll finish in a couple of weeks, as I said. And then there are 2 books that were in my original TBR and that I didn't get into, and honestly it's starting to be shameful, but I'm still putting it in next month's TBR. And that's The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Which I've been trying to read for months and months, but because I always prioritize books from the library or books that I'm reading with a group of people, then I still haven't got to this one, but I will at some point. And then the other book is for a book club that was happening at work. I didn't get it in time to actually participate in the book club, but that is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Again, I will be reading this in September. Now that I have it, I may as well. There are a few things that I try to read every month, or even if I don't, I kind of make a balance of whether I've read them or not, or how I'm doing with those. One is books around the world, that I still haven't done a dedicated video for that challenge of mine, but I actually didn't read any books around the world this month. Then I try to read from Black authors, at least a book a month. I might expand it to people of color in general, but I do want to kind of emphasize Black authors because I haven't read much from them before. Whereas, say, some people consider Latin America people of color. I don't personally, but I'm just saying I have read quite a lot from Latin American authors. So I am prioritizing Black authors right now. And so for books by Black authors, I am reading The Count of Monte-Cristo and the Are Presence Obsolete. And then next month, when I get into The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, it's not by a Black author, but Henrietta Lacks herself was Black, so there's that as well. It's not a known voice though. Then I have books from my scratch bucket list that I did present. I'll leave something down below and up here. And from that list, I have The Count of Monte-Cristo, so it ticks a lot of boxes, let's say. And I have The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks for next month as well. So all in all, I liked all the books that I read this month. There were times where they were a bit predictable or a bit slow, but overall I really enjoyed it. I think I had an excellent month in reading, and I read a lot of things that I wanted to read, in particular for various reasons, like you've seen just now with my challenges. I also read a variety of genres, which I think is always good, especially for me, that I'm always looking to kind of expand horizons and things. So I read a sci-fi, children literature, short stories, adult literature, a couple of thrillers, and a fantasy book. And that is all I have. So I'll come back this week with my plans for September. I've already said some of them, but I'll also be talking about some videos that I want to make in September. And in the meantime, let me know how you are doing. Let me know if you read any of these books and what you thought about them, especially if you thought something really different from what I've been saying in this video. And I would like to know about Tales of the Unexpected, if you have seen the TV show. Let me know what your thoughts are and what you thought of your reading month, what you thought of my reading month, and what you want to read in September as well, so we can kind of get organized for the next month. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon.